Uh, Hi everyone, Brad here. I wanted to bring forth a conversation today about context and how powerful context is for us as human beings, and how context actually shapes our world. Not the world out here, but the world in here from which we come at the world out there. And we come at thinking that the world out there is this. So let's just take a minute to define what context is for a moment, because this is something that is important to understand. So context, and I just Googled a couple definitions. Context: the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So what is it that could be fully understood and assessed? Is the event, the statement, or idea. So like, we think we have ideas, but we have a context for an idea as well. And within that context, that particular idea, the specifics of that idea, we understand from that context. Okay? Another definition says, what do we mean by context? So this is AI's overview from Google. Context is the surrounding circumstances, background information, and relevant factors that give meaning to a word, event, or situation. So again, the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea. It says the surrounding circumstances or background information and relevant factors that give meaning to a word, event, or situation. So an idea or a statement. So that is context, and we'll talk a little bit about it so that we can kind of get a handle on this. So let me start by offering up the beginning of a story. So there once was a beautiful girl and a handsome prince. Okay? Now, that's all I've given so far. There once was a beautiful girl and a handsome prince. Now, I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about this. You and I we have an already background for this story that we're starting here. And, we at least have whatever movies we watched as a kid, whatever storybooks we read that begin to form a context for this beautiful girl and this handsome prince. Okay? But I can shift it by saying, there once was a beautiful girl and a handsome prince that lived in Thailand. Okay, now the already that you had just a minute ago is gone. Now you have a context for Thailand, even if you've never been interested in Thailand. You have something that's there, at least some past associations, some things that you've learned about Thailand, or at least Asia. And then that begins to inform you about what this might be. So that's context. It's that background information. Now, when we're talking about really having a breakthrough for ourselves in our lives, in an area of life that we've been struggling with, or that we're disempowered in, or that we find ourselves upset in, you and I don't see that situation for what it is. Rather, we see that situation from the context of whatever the context is that we have about that situation. And then that's how we see the situation. But you and I don't relate to it like a context. We relate to the situation like the way that we see it is how the situation is. And then we go about interacting with that situation the way that we think the situation is. And if it is a situation where we find ourselves feeling limited, upset, frustrated, disappointed, then we have a context that's sort of all of these factors in the background that's informing how we see the situation, or how that the meaning that's given to that event or situation. That's what it is. Some of us are so attached to how we see a situation that if somebody brings forth what I'm saying right now about the situation, we will argue with them. Because we insist that no, the way, some people will tell me when I bring this forth, they'll say, but no, Brad, that I see that applies to a lot of things, but it doesn't apply to this situation. And here, let me tell you why. And then what they'll start giving me is their context. That for them is not a context, So we have, by the time that we're like 5-6 years old, you and I are already off and running inside of a conversation that's been happening in this world that's given us lots and lots of context already about things. And, it's everywhere. People like to talk about like their limitations and why they are the way that they are because of like the way that they were raised. But the way you and I were raised wasn't just within our family of origin. We got a lot of the sort of really fixed, rigid ways of operating or the ways of thinking from that. But even within that scenario or within those systems, you and I differentiated on many different subjects, and we said, we didn't see it that way. But we do get context sort of programmed from the whole world around us. It's in every book that we've read, every conversation we engaged in at our schools, in our churches, on the playground. And, I've often said I got a lot of it from watching Young and the Restless on my summers off in junior high school, and it goes into the context from which we come to life or we come at life. So it's sort of like this. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, the end, bang. And then you and I come from that, and then we look out at the world, which doesn't, where that stuff doesn't add up, and then we make it wrong. And then we insist that, yeah, but it really is wrong. Now, there are situations where you could say are wrong. Certainly we don't look at somebody being, brutally murdered as right. We don't just sit there and say, well, that's just the context, it's not real. And, that's what a lot of Course in Miracles students do with A Course in Miracles. They just say, oh, it's not real. Oh, well, the world's not real. There is a world that is real. But the world that we come from, that it is, isn't. I'll try to say that again. The world you and I come from into the world that is, isn't. That's the one that isn't. That one is no more and no less than a collection of ideas from which we don't know is a collection of ideas. And we just get stuck within it, and then from that we see this one as if this one is the one that we're coming from. Now, context will decide for you what you see should and shouldn't be, or is possible or not possible. And that's like whether you like it or not. See, there's a lot of people that don't want to engage in this conversation because they're like, well, I can see that applies to all the weak people out here, it doesn't apply to me. And then they, it's like a very egoic point of view from which you can say, well, I'll just go into life and, I don't operate that way. I just, I make things happen or something like that. But if we go and talk to like a lot of your friends and family, they'll say that you have a lot of issues, that you're very attempt at controlling, and you're the only one who doesn't see that. And this conversation could be very powerful because you and I started building this context a long time ago. The conversation that we have been engaged in our head with ourselves about this is this and that's that is the context that now we come from at life. And that doesn't occur for you and me like it's just a context. It really occurs for us like that's the way that it is. And things should be different based on what we're saying. And then even if, let's say, you're right about something out here that you say is wrong, well, that's a really hard one to deal with because you're seeing something that you're so sure of is wrong. But even then, it is not that is causing you to feel the way that you feel, and it is not that is limiting you in the way that you feel limited. When you come from a context called that shouldn't be, you're going to experience yourself as disempowered. You're going to experience yourself as something that can't shift reality because that already is. Now, you could come from a different context if you can be responsible for the one that you have. Now, how do you do that? Well, I think the easiest way to do that and the softest way to do that and the most gentle approach to do that, which actually works, is say, I got stuck inside of a context called that should be different. And from inside of that context, it made me feel this way, this way, this way, this way, and this way. And it wasn't the situation that made me feel that way, but it was the context I ended up coming from out of it. And man, I didn't know that. From inside of it, it really looks that way. And then just be with that for a minute. See, everybody wants to now do something. Oh, well, now I'll do this, which you're still coming from that if you say that you're now going to do this. But when you really land in this, what I'm saying, like taking responsibility isn't that you blame yourself for where you ended up. You and I started this conversation, and the conversation started us also into it a long time ago. You and I sort of became infected with it. And you could say it to yourself that way, man, but you're just saying what's so. Is that's where I ended up. And from there, all of my actions, all of my feelings were perfectly correlated to the background of information and seemingly relevant factors that gave meaning to the way that I see it. What I'm saying is that's just a context rather than that's the way that it is. And when you can separate the two, even though the thing is the way that it is, then you don't have to meaning yourself within the framework of how you see that. You don't have to experience the limitations. You can say that's one possible way of looking at it in which I got stuck. We say things all the time about life, this person is this way. That person is stubborn. That person is uncaring. That person, they only care about themselves. They think they're better than everybody else. Da 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 da. Let's look at that one for a minute, because this is a common one where people get stuck. They think they're better than everybody else. So within that context, within that framework called they think they're better than everybody else, what is it that how do you end up experiencing life from within that? You experience yourself as being judged. You experience yourself as having to fight. You experience yourself as being defensive, right? So the context is very decisive about who you get to be, not the situation. I mean, you know, I've definitely sat on my high horse enough in this life, sort of in the background, thinking other people are dumb or something like that, where people could have seen that like he thinks he's better than everybody else, when I was saying, you know, in my delusional mind, they're dumb. And that's it wasn't like I was having conscious thought, I think I'm better than everybody else. That wasn't what was happening at all. So you know, but we were all off. We were all off. And here's the other thing. None of it was necessary. And none of it made a difference in whatever situations we were in to actually make those situations be the best that they could be for everyone. You know, and we're all in the world right now. My context is right. My meanings are right. My ideas are right. Yours are wrong. You know? While life passes us by, the opportunities to make a difference in the world with the people that we care about pass us by. And some of us are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the day when we'll be right about the way that we see it. And then, you know, it's as if the gates of heaven are going to open up and everything's going to be better then, because we'll have been right. Listen, you may be right about the way that you see things, but you're still the one who's stuck inside of it. And, you know, you may consider asking yourself a question. Do you want to continue to be stuck inside of a context or something that you're pissed off about? You know, people sometimes work on their resentments. You know, you don't have resentments. Resentments have you. Only 100%. We don't have resentments. They have us. They run our lives. Because any idea that takes root goes into the whole background of what this says, relevant factors that give meaning to. And when you start plucking these ideas out one by one about what got added back there, you'll come to see that some of them are not valid. And even if they are true or once were, they're not true now. And even if they were, they still don't give you an empowered context from which you could show up inside of a situation and actually make a difference, not only for other people, but for yourself. See, you could say that, like, I got stuck with so much disempowering stuff my whole life. And it was like, this was my experience. And then it was like, every time I tried to work on it, it just got worse, or it's like the target moved or something like that. And then I would work on that. And then it was like whack-a-mole. I'm doing 15,000 and just more and more and more popped up. And man, I was just so, and then the more that happened, the more meaning I added. And the more meaning I added, the worse that it got. And that's what happened. Okay? You could say that. And then you could say, now, I didn't know that I was the one that was creating all of that meaning. Not because I did it on purpose. It's just what we ended up with, folks. You, me, everyone. Everybody's in the same boat. Notice that with that statement, I just removed all of the guilt on it. That's forgiveness, by the way. And then from that place, we just ended up there. And here we are now. If I had the power to create such disempowering context, then I think I'll create a new one. How about creating a possibility? The possibility I'm inventing for myself in my life and creating for myself in my life is the possibility of being free. And the possibility of being peaceful. And the possibility of really being loving. The possibility of being kind. And the possibility of being empowered. And the possibility of making a difference. In the space in which that context, those old disempowering stories and assessments and judgments and erroneous information, we haven't even tested it, that's all taking up, when that becomes available for you, when you take responsibility for that's what's been going on, not the thing, by just acknowledging that with yourself, then you can create in that new space. But you can create something that is, inspiring to you, and it's available and relevant for you right now. See, some of you go into a conversation like, I heard somebody say that when I created a possibility with her, she says, I want that. And when you create, I want that, what you're creating is, I don't have that. That's what you're saying. I'm saying that's just a context you got stuck with. Or you'll go, well, I need to know how to do that. So you're creating that you don't know how to do that. Well, did you know how to do the other? No, you just did it. You didn't mean to do it. It's just where you ended up. You declare it inside the space that we just cleared. When I say, oh my God, I just ended up with all that stuff. And from inside of it, it was making me feel anxious and nervous and disempowered and worried and stressed and like a crazy person and trying to control everything and looking for validation from people who don't have it. And, we all suffer that. And maybe I didn't know how I did it, but I ended up, doing that because nobody created it for me. That's how this thing works. It just makes meaning. And I believed it. That's taking responsibility. And, don't blame yourself, because then you're creating another context. Like, you're saying that you did something wrong. You didn't do something wrong. You didn't even know that you were doing it. It's just where you ended up. We all did. We all did. You can go around for the ways that you have attacked other people from that defensive place, and you can say that, I'm sorry, I was a crazy person. And I just want to take responsibility for the things that I said to you. I see how that could have really been hurtful. And if you do that, you'll change the world. Instantly, you'll change it. And then in the space of that, you could say the possibility I'm inventing is a possibility. The possibility I'm bringing forth, that's what creation is. I'm bringing forth now is the possibility of being free. And you're free now. But you always have been, you just hadn't known it. And your experience of being free has been constrained within the context that you didn't know was a context. And from that background gives how you see the world. And it actually does it like this. It just narrows what we can see. So we can't see anything outside the context that we don't know as a context. And when we get that was just a context, then things become available for us that aren't within the old context. So that's why I said when you create something, don't create like, now I'll do this. Just create what there is to create. It'll be spontaneous. And it'll be great. It'll be wonderful. And that space is really to me, that's the birthright and that's the juice of that a human being really is. You can call it Christ, you can call it Buddha, you can call it whatever the hell you want to call it. I wouldn't call it any of those because you got too much story around that from the past. Nobody knows what those words mean. We're dragging them into the present, trying to overcome the, we're talking about context today, the context that we've been in, and it hasn't worked. That's religion. And then we fool ourselves with that and hope things will be different. And then we wait for the sign that'll tell us what to do. The man to descend out of the clouds, and I don't know what you think, he's going to just dangle his fingers over you and you're just going to get it, or you're not going to suffer anymore, or something like that. But suffering comes out of this context that we have going on. And even if it is a situation that was really bad, like somebody did something to you that hurt, they're not doing it right now, but that context is still running and you've gotten stuck with it. You've gotten stuck inside of it. And you can get out of it by acknowledging it for what it is, which was an idea that became the context from which you now came at life. And you didn't know that's what happened to you. Because you can give it up like that, or you can continue to beat the drum of it and tell your story to everybody that you can get, and trying to fool yourself that you'll be satisfied by being right. And if you're going to do that, I'd say you should just go join the Republican Party now, because that's what they're doing. Sorry, that's the way that it is. And there's that on both sides, because every human being has a context from which we are that life is. And life is not our context. Who we are about life is our context. Now, we produce results in life based on that. We try to prove that. And so everything that goes wrong here is our doing, not life's. But we do that to life. And if you want the world to be different, you need to get into this conversation and learn how to look from a place of no context, or a place of context is only a context, so that you can create. Because when you're from that space, you don't go out here and try to punish and kill people. You don't go out here and point your finger and say bad, wrong. You understand where people are coming from, but you're more effective at getting it all straightened out and cleared out, because you know where it comes from, and you know that if they had a choice, they wouldn't come from there. You and I have been taught so many things about right and wrong. I know people who are so stubborn that, they'd rather die, I think, and die being right, than even explore this conversation. They hear it like, if I bring this conversation forth, they hear it like, oh, well, that's just something that he's saying so that he can get something that he wants. Another context, how does that one leave you? Super enjoying life and feeling great and powerful and like your life really matters and makes a difference? I don't think so. It leaves you bitter and frustrated and attacking people like me. And then at the same time wanting us to love you. It's like, Who would you be without your story? Who could you be? What kind of things would you do? Maybe you'd just be peaceful and relaxed and free. You know, and some of the people that I know about, they dip their toe into all kinds of different things. They don't ever really do them, you know. They'll go to a training and sit in the room and then not apply what they're doing because they make everything wrong there. They look for ways to invalidate it. You know, or they join a group that says, you know, do all of these tools, and then they just, you know, say, well, I go, and then so that they can, I don't know, have a identity of an appearance, and then they don't receive the benefits of it. And they have so much disempowering context in the background about who it is that they think that they are. That's not good, because you and I have done some pretty brutal judgments on ourselves, and that's how we come at life, that we are that, and life is, you know, done this thing to us or something like that, and that now it's something that we just have to overcome, and it's beating us up all the time or something like that. That's how it occurs for us from inside of it. So, you know, if you want to work with this, write down on a piece of paper the context I've been coming from has been, and then just write it out. I'm not good enough. You know, I'm unattractive. Whatever it is, I'm dumb. I'm not good at math. I suck at technology. I'm a disappointment to my parents. Whatever it is. And how that context has made me interact with other people is like they're a threat. They think they're better than me. You know, all of that. And then just at the end, you know, just write down, this is not what happened actually. It's just a context that I believed onto what happened. And then I ended up, that became the context from which I operate in life. And then what I'm going to create now, what I am creating now, in this moment, is the possibility of being free. And then just sit with it. Don't go doing something about it. You will know that is already relevant. You're just catching up to what has already been, already is. You know, that's the point of my videos, is to make this relevant for you now, because it is the ground, it is the truth of what we are. But some of you, it's so hard to fight with you because you just want to be right. Yeah, but what about? Let me tell you this part. I don't think da-da-da. You know? And I'm telling you, you know, you're already stuck there. And it's like you're fighting for your stuckness. And I'm asking you to stop and consider that you're fighting, the way that you're operating is to keep something that you don't want. You know? And if you're a Course in Miracles student, that whole thing has become part of your thing. I know Course in Miracles students who've been doing it for years and years and years. I call them up when I'm upset. They have nothing to offer. Nothing to offer. Because they don't know that they're still inside of a context. And now they've sprinkled A Course in Miracles on top of it and tried to create a new identity on top of the one that they don't know is just a collection of ideas they got stuck with. You know, A Course in Miracles is here to take you through an experience that will reveal everything that I'm saying here. I hope that this has been helpful. Remember, a context, it says context is the surrounding circumstances, background information, and relevant factors that give meaning to a word, event, or situation. Now, I would just say this a little differently. Context is the surrounding circumstances and the assumed meaning of those circumstances, background, supposed information, and supposedly relevant factors that give meaning to a word, event, or situation. I think that's more accurate because we don't know that even the context that we're coming from is absolutely accurate. Mostly, I would say it's just a collection of ideas that we as human beings have been making up and adding to since time began. And if you set those aside for just a second, you experience peace and silence. Thanks for watching. You guys have a good day.